Welcome to today's Explainer. We're getting into a topic today that touches on global geopolitics, sure, but more importantly, it is a deeply personal story about human resilience and some really intense unintended consequences. We're going to explore the incredibly complex, long-lasting fallout of the U.S.-Iraq war on Nepali migrant workers. It's a situation that has literally created a hidden diaspora, people who are absolutely trapped by a mix of strict policies and painful history. So let's map out exactly how this happened and why it's so important right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. Would you give up seeing your family for 10 whole years just to make sure they have enough to eat? Now, this isn't some hypothetical thought experiment. It's the agonizing, everyday reality for thousands of people. Just imagine traveling thousands of miles away to secure your family's future, only to realize that going back home to just hug your kids means instantly losing the income that keeps a roof over their heads?
To truly grasp what this means, we really need to look at it through the eyes of the people actually living it. Let's say you're a Nepali woman working right now as a domestic helper in Kurdistan. On paper, you are thriving. You're sending vital remittance money back home, you're paying for your siblings' education, you're keeping your family afloat. But there is this massive, silent cost. You are completely, legally cut off from returning home. Your financial stability is basically bought with this agonizing, total personal isolation.
Section 1. The price of providing, and the massive underground pipeline behind it.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how that deeply personal, individual struggle we just talked about is actually just one tiny piece of a huge hidden system. Even though the formal war ended years ago and there are incredibly severe legal restrictions in place, there is this sprawling underground pipeline that's driven by pure economic desperation. Today, our sources estimate there are somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000 Nepalis living and working in Iraq and the autonomous Kurdistan region. I mean, that's like an entire small city of people living in a total geopolitical blind spot. And who actually makes up that massive number? Well, it might totally surprise you, especially if you strictly associate Iraq with military conflict. Today, a staggering 75% of this modern diaspora are women. They're primarily working as domestic helpers, hotel staff, cashiers, restaurant employees. The remaining 25% are men and folks in other roles. These are just everyday people working civilian service jobs, but they're caught in a web of legal restrictions that were designed for a completely different era.
Which brings us to the core of their struggle, a profound legal catch-22. Because of specific government travel bans, if one of these workers flies back to Nepal just to visit their family, the Nepali government flat out will not issue them formal labor permits to fly back to their job in Iraq. So you've got thousands of women making this heartbreaking choice to stay in the Middle East for a decade or more without ever visiting home. They have the money for a plane ticket, but taking that single flight home means permanent unemployment.
Section 2. Deception in the war zone. How did we actually get here?
To understand why this crazy modern-day trap even exists, we have to flash back to the 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. Now, Nepal was not part of the military coalition, right? Yet its citizens became deeply entangled in the war zone. Private defense contractors needed a massive amount of cheap labor for logistics, cooking, cleaning, and base security. So to maximize their profits, they used local subcontractors who basically targeted vulnerable, low-income laborers from developing nations. They used this systemic exploitation tactic known as the Jordan trick. Here's how it worked. First, thousands of Nepali men were lured by agencies promising really safe, lucrative hotel jobs in places like Jordan or Kuwait. Step 2, the second they arrived, their passports were confiscated. And Step 3, they were forcibly trafficked right across the border into volatile Iraqi combat zones to support the military infrastructure. They were essentially kidnapped into a war zone.
And the reality these trafficked men faced on the ground was just incredibly grim. First off, they went into deep debt just paying illegal recruitment fees for jobs that didn't even exist. Once they were actually in Iraq, they were vastly underpaid compared to what they'd been promised. And worse, they were forced into super high-risk environments. We're talking driving supply convoys through hostile territory or guarding static military bases. And they did all of this while getting only a tiny fraction of the wages and safety gear that American personnel got. They were classified as third-country nationals, which meant they were highly vulnerable and treated as entirely disposable by these subcontractors.
Section 3. The 2004 Flashpoint.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Because this whole environment of deception and danger was basically a powder keg, and eventually, it exploded. This timeline is absolutely crucial for understanding the laws today. In August 2004, an Iraqi insurgent group named Jamaat Ansar al-Sunnah kidnapped 12 Nepali workers who had been deceptively trafficked into the country. Just days later, a graphic video of their execution was released to the world. The immediate aftermath back in Nepal was explosive. Unprecedented, violent riots broke out across Kathmandu. Protesters were literally burning down recruitment agencies, clashing with police. The public outrage was massive. In response, the Nepali government declared a national day of mourning and instantly slapped a strict blanket ban on its citizens traveling to Iraq for employment.
And adding another layer to this tragedy, the families of the victims struggled to find any real justice. Even when lawsuits were filed in U.S. courts, like the famous Adhikari v. Dawan Partners case, achieving legal accountability from these massive military subcontractors proved to be incredibly difficult. The legal barriers were just too high, and that left a really deep, unhealed wound in the national consciousness of Nepal.
Section 4. The Legal Catch-22. Living in the Shadows.
And you know, that unhealed wound brings us right back to the present day, because that strict travel ban from 2004, it was never lifted, and that forces today's modern workers to use a completely illicit pipeline. To even get to Iraq today, they have to use illicit visit visas, usually routing themselves secretly through Dubai or Kuwait. The financial cost of this is immense. We're talking millions of extra rupees spent on bribes and hidden fees just to make the trip. But honestly, the human cost is so much worse. Because they are technically undocumented in the eyes of their own home country, they have zero formal diplomatic protections. Nothing. This leaves them highly vulnerable to employer abuse, wage theft, or any sudden shifts in regional security. They are completely off the books and completely on their own.
Section 5. A Shadow Community.
And this brilliantly illustrates what we are left with today. A fascinating yet tragic evolution of a migrant workforce that was shaped entirely by conflict and restrictive policies. Just look at the complete shift over the last 2 decades. The 2003 wartime reality was predominantly young men, recruited for manual or security labor, actively facing combat fatalities and IEDs. Fast forward to the present day, it's predominantly women, finding employment in private households, but facing a totally different set of dangers: legal isolation, human trafficking traps, the sheer inability to see their families. So the nature of the danger changed from physical combat to legal and emotional isolation, but the vulnerability, that remains exactly the same.
Now, you might be asking yourself, hey, if the war is over, why not just change the law? Well, while the Iraqi government has stabilized significantly over the years and has actually proposed a formal bilateral labor agreement to bring in skilled workers legally, there's a massive political stalemate. Nepal's government remains deeply, deeply hesitant to lift the ban. That painful memory of the 2004 tragedy, it still casts a very long shadow. The political risk of formally reopening that door is perceived by lawmakers as just too high. And the result? Thousands of their own citizens are left stranded in this endless bureaucratic limbo.
So the crucial point is this. We're left with a deeply human paradox. We have a shadow community of tens of thousands of people providing these absolute vital financial lifelines to their families back in Nepal. They are achieving financial success by the standards of their situation, but they are paying for it with permanent exile from their homeland. Just consider the sheer resilience it takes to make that trade, to have to choose between feeding your family and ever getting to hold them again. Is the price of providing too high? It is a heavy question without an easy answer, but understanding the history behind it is the very first step. Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me today.